Hello friends, welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Danny and today we're going to go through my top 10 fantasy series. If you tuned in on Saturday, you have already seen my top 10 fantasy standalones list. And so now is the companion video, the top 10 fantasy series, which was much harder to curate, by the way. Both of these videos were inspired by a Reddit post, which I also did a video on. And in that Reddit post, the internet came together to discuss the top 10 fantasy books of the 21st century. And I asked you guys in that video if you wanted to see my list. So that's why these two videos exist. I will say with series, I did set some rules and boundaries for myself because otherwise I just had too many to choose from and it was very, very hard to narrow down anyway. So I told myself that I was not allowed to repeat an author. So if I love both series by an author, I can only include one of them. I also said that I had to have read more than one book in the series because I do have a ton of books or a ton of series out there that I've only read the first novel. And I just didn't think it was fair to consider those whenever I haven't continued with the series. With this list, I am going to give some honorable mentions because there are 6 series, probably more, but I narrowed it down to these 6 that I really, really want in my top 10, but they just didn't make it, but I still think that they deserve all the praise and I do want to shout their names from the rooftops. And so I am going to give you guys 6 honorable mentions before I start talking about my top 10. The honorable mentions are going to be listed in no particular order. I am going to start with Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. I've absolutely loved this series. It just didn't make the cut, unfortunately, for my top 10. If you haven't heard of Emily Wilde's, you are following Emily, who is a scientist of sorts who is making a log of all of the fae in the world that she lives in. And in the first book, the Encyclopedia of Fairies, you are following her going to a very cold northern town and investigating some fae that no one have ever investigated before, and she gets herself into a bit of a pickle. The dynamic between her and her side character, Wendell, it's very fun because she is very much not a people person and he is very charismatic. And the fae in this world are also really intriguing. You have a whole bunch of different varieties, some that are extremely dangerous and some that are just minor nuisances, and it is really fun to learn about them along the way. Next in my honorable mentions is the Bands series with Kings of the Wild is the first book and Bloody Rose is the second. These are both 5-star reads for me, and if you haven't heard of this series, in the first book you follow a group of men who are 20 years past their prime, and they originally were in a band. And by band, I mean mercenary band. And in this land that you are in within this fantasy series, you have monsters that have been tamed by society in certain elements, but you also have these mercenary bands that would come out and protect civilization and make sure that these monsters don't come within the bounds of the normal lives of people. And that's what these men used to do. Well, 20 years after their prime, after they've retired, they haven't been fighting monsters. One of their daughters is in peril, and so they decide to get the band back together and go on one last adventure together. With Bloody Rose, you follow the next generation of mercenaries, and oh man, it's hilarity to its finest in these. The next honorable mention is actually a newer series to me, and that is the Witch's Compendium of Monsters. The first book in the series is Foul Days. The second one is Monstrous Nights. This is a duology. I rated both of these 4.5 stars. In this series, you follow a witch who lives in the cursed city of Chernigrad. Chernigrad is plagued by monsters the 12 days after New Year's Eve. Throughout the year, they do have monster attacks, but it is way more prevalent the 12 days after New Year's Eve. Well, our main character, whose name I can't remember at the moment, but she ends up gambling away her shadow at the very beginning of the book, which is right before New Year's Eve. A witch's shadow specifically, is what gives her her magic, and this becomes a very large problem for her throughout the Monstrous Nights, and you have to follow her trying to get her shadow back. It's very fun, monster-filled. What's not to love? The next honorable mention is the Saints of Steel series by T. Kingfisher, which is a fantasy romance / horror that you follow the paladins of the Saint of Steel. The Saint of Steel has passed away, and the paladins of this saint have had horrible experiences because their god has died. And so you are essentially looking at the aftermath of these men's trauma, and you follow them and a specific love interest in each of the individual books, and they are are trying to help solve mysteries, make the land a safer place. And there are a whole bunch of weird things going on in this city and a kingdom that they are living in. It's a very gritty world. It's a lot of fun, and the banter is top-notch. Next in the honorable mentions is the Faithful and the Fallen series, which I've only read Malice and Valor, but I absolutely think that this will be on the list at some point in time whenever I make this list again. But I absolutely love this world. You follow so many characters in a kingdom that is at war. You know that there are some components going on in the background, specifically two of our main characters from the first book have something to do with the gods in this world. They are more important than they seem, and you're trying to unravel the kingdom politics along with just loving the characters that John Gwynne creates in these massive worlds. The last one in the honorable mentions is Fragile Threads of Power. This is the Threads of Power series, which will be the companion series to Darker Shades of Magic, and I absolutely think that this will be on my top 10 years from now whenever I can read more than just this one book that's been released. I can't tell you much about the series because it does continue in the aftermath of the Darker Shades series, but it is fantastic. The magic system is so intricate, and I just love being back in the world. Okay, on to the top 10. Now, remember, I could not repeat authors throughout the top 10. I also had to read at least 2 books in the series in order to put it on my top 10. So the number 10 spot is going to go to the Winnowing Flame series. So we have Ninth Rain, The Bitter Twins, and Poison Song. I have not read Poison Song yet, but I have read The Bitter Twins and Ninth Rain, and man, this world is so fascinating. With Ninth Rain, if you haven't heard of it, because this is a series that I do think is really, really underhyped. You follow some characters in this that are living in a world where some things start to happen that are reminiscent of bad things in history. So one of the characters you follow is Vintage, who is a scientist, and she is studying these events that are happening and potentially trying to figure out what's going on, trying to warn the correct people. You also have a Fell Witch whose name is Noon, and a Fell Witch uses life magic to create flame. And so a lot of people fear her because she can essentially suck your life from you and use it as her power. And so you start out with her in a prison in a really horrible conditions. People fear her. She really unrightfully so, because she's never really done anything to endanger people on purpose. And you also follow a character whose name I'm not going to remember, but he is kind of an elven creature. But the elven people in this series are immortal, and they have some bad blood with humans. However, they are the only people, being that they are kind of immortal, they know the history surrounding some of the events that are happening, but because of this bad blood with humans, something has happened within their society that has caused a lot of them to die off. And so some of the knowledge that is really important to the survival of this world is in very, very few people. And so you do follow one of those elven people. And these 3 people have to come together to figure out how to save the world, essentially. It's really fun and really inventive. It's a story, a world I don't know that I've seen before anywhere else. The number 9 spot is going to go to the Invisible Library series, which I am currently reading the 3rd book in this series. It's so much fun, and I always forget how much fun I have until I pick up another volume. It reads really easy. You are following our 2 main characters, who are Irene and Kai. Irene is a librarian for the Invisible Library. The Invisible Library is essentially a portal world that is connected to a whole bunch of different dimensions, a whole bunch of different Earths that have different things going on with them, different kingdom politics, and also different levels of supernatural creatures. So you might run into an Earth that has vampires, ghosts, fae. You might also run into an Earth that has dragons. You might also run into another one that has other supernatural creatures. Anything's game. Like, I just love it because there's always something new to explore. And Irene is the librarian, so she works for the Invisible Library. The Invisible Library's purpose is to track down and keep safe the artifacts and books that are very rare and almost defining to these different dimensions. And so you get to see your favorite aspects and books kind of within different dimensions. In one of them, I won't tell you which one, and it's not really important, it's just a little Easter egg, but there is a sequel to Mary Shelley's Frankenstein that exists in one of the dimensions, and so that is one of the artifacts that they collect and put in the library. And I just think that part is fun, but you also have this inner turmoil, this political goings on that you learn throughout the series. They can be read as standalones, I believe, but I would recommend reading all of them because they are fantastic. The 8th series I do own, but it's on like my very top shelf and I don't want to get like a ladder out to have to get it down. So I'm just going to tell you about it because I'm sure you've heard of it, and that is the Kingkiller Chronicles. So the first book in this is The Name of the Wind. So we are still waiting on the 3rd book, but I do still have a special place in my heart for this series. If you haven't heard of Name of the Wind, or if you've just forgotten what it's about, you follow a legendary character named Quoth. In dual timelines, kind of. You follow him at a later stage in life in the current timeline where there's something going on that's really bad in the town that he's in and you're not quite sure what exactly is happening. And he happens to run into this person at his inn who is a chronicler, and this person realizes who he is and asks for his story, and Quoth decides to give it in 3 days. And that is what the 3 books are supposed to represent, is Quoth giving his story to this chronicler over 3 days. And so the past timeline is how he became this legendary figure and how he ended up as this innkeeper. The writing in this alone would put it in my top 10. It's so immersive and beautiful, and even in this kind of dreary place, even the current timeline that you're in is a dreary place. Like they have some gritty things going on, and it's still just incredible how Rothfuss has described the world. And so I really enjoy the story, and I want there to be an ending. Fingers crossed, friends. The number 7 spot goes to the Lady Trent series. I'm not going to hold up all of them because I have all 5. But this is the series that starts with A Natural History of Dragons, which has each of them have these beautiful dragons on the front cover. They also have illustrations inside all of the books as well, which are very fun. If you haven't heard me talk about Lady Trent, which I doubt, it follows Isabella Trent, who is kind of it's not Earth, so it's not set in our world, but it's very similar, and it's historical times where they are expecting women to do safe jobs, if have jobs at all. And Isabella really just wants to study dragons. She doesn't want to get married, she doesn't want to have kids, she just wants to study these creatures that are very elusive in society, and she finds a way to do it. In each of the books, you follow her ventures discovering a different dragon species and how she interacts with the cultures surrounding these dragons, which I think is my favorite part of the entire series. Is in each of these, she has to travel to an unknown world for her, or an unknown city for her, and she has to learn how to live amongst the people there and not cause a ruckus. Although she does cause a ruckus, but it's all in the name of studying dragons and following her heart. So she's such a fun character to follow. She's quick-witted, and she gets herself into some bad situations, but she never blames circumstances. She always figures ways out. Not always, but like sometimes she's got help, but I just love the series. My number 6 spot goes to The Gentleman Bastards, which I own, but I own it on Kindle. And I have started my reread this year, and I have forgotten how much I absolutely love the gang of boys that you get to know. In the first book, I can't help it. This is another unfinished series on this list, but I am hopeful that we will get another book soon. The first book is The Lies of Locke Lamora. You are in a Venetian kind of setting, and you are following our main character, Locke, who is very young at the start of the book, and you get to learn and see his progression, essentially becoming a thief for a fake priest. If that's not enough to get you to read it, I don't know what is. It's hilarious. It is crass at times, but it's such a good found family storyline at the heart of this that I was so shocked when I reread it that I had forgotten about the relationships that had formed. It had been years since I read the first book, and I remembered loving it, but I just didn't remember why. Oh my gosh, if you are looking for found family, look no further. You need to read The Lies of Locke My number 5 spot, you can probably tell, is the Libraries trilogy from Mark Lawrence. Currently, we are waiting on book 3, which I think comes out in April of next year, but I just had to give this the number 5 spot. I absolutely love these books. The Book That Wouldn't Burn, which is the first book, got a 5-star. The next one got a 4.75, but oh man, is this world just a world I would like to live in? Although I don't know how well I would do, but hopefully someone would save me. If you haven't heard me talk about The Book That Wouldn't Burn, you are following Ivar and Levira, who live in very different circumstances. Levira lives out in the dust, and so the civilization of this world is behind walls because outside in the dust there are monsters and thievery and things that are going on, and her village is very destitute. And something happens at the beginning of the storyline that she ends up getting transported to one of the cities. And so with her storyline, you get to follow her having to deal with prejudices within the city regarding people of the dust, and also her trying to find a way to fit in with the jobs and tasks that she's been given. You also have Ivar, who lives in the library, which you can see on this beautiful cover. And the library is undefinable. It is absolutely fantastic. The magics and the mystery surrounding the library and the upkeep of the library, the guardians within the library, there's just so much to explore. And Ivar's family have been living in the library for generations, and they cannot escape, and they are trying to find a way out. And so you get to follow his storyline as well. And Levara and Ivar, their stories intertwine in ways that it's just fantastic. This is still, with the exception of maybe the 5th season, I think this is the best plotted book I've ever read. The ending, chef's kiss. Like, it was absolutely fantastic. The number 4 spot, I am so excited that I get to give it to these set of books because I wouldn't have been able to had I done this video a month ago. And that is The Cemeteries of Amalo, or Amalo. I'm not exactly sure how you pronounce it, but the first book is The Witness for the Dead. Second book is The Grief of Stones. And the third book, which is coming out next year, guys, is the Tomb of something. I can't remember, but we get to follow Thara Kalahar again, and I am so excited to be able to continue. This is the only author that has been featured in both my standalone list and my series list. So, I mean, come on now, like, claps for Catherine Addison. Anyway, enough for me gushing. If you haven't heard me talk about The Witness for the Dead, you follow a character from the world of the Goblin Emperor, which was a book featured on my fantasy standalones list, because this is a standalone. You do not have to read these books afterwards. But you get to follow a side character within that world called Thara Kalahar, who is a witness for the dead. And he he is assigned tasks of witnessing for people who have died. He gets to be their kind of last will and testament. He makes sure that they find dignity in death, and he helps solve mysteries. He can't actually talk to the dead, and so there are murders that he helps solve in both of these books. But I would say my favorite part of both of these stories isn't the solving of the murders. It's the little tiny things that he does for the people whose loved ones have died, and he helps them grieve. And his journey of being this person who is always caught between life and death, and how hard it is on him, he just feels like a friend I want to reread this series, and I just finished The Grief of Stones last month. So if that doesn't tell you that you should run out and read the series, if you haven't read The Goblin Emperor, I would recommend reading this first because you're going to get some background information. You realize I'm holding this upside down. You're going to get some background information on Thara Kelleher that I would recommend having before you jump in. But if you're not into chunky reads, you could pick up this series without having read The Goblin Emperor. It's fantastic, friends. Go read it. Number 3 on my list is the Rhaenyra Revelations, which are all like super chunky, so it's hard for me to lift all of them up. The first book is The Theft of Swords. The second book is Rise of the Empire, and then The Heir of Navron. And I just absolutely love this series. It is absolutely fantastic. It has a sister series called the Rhaenyra Chronicles that I've been making my way through this year, and these two men, I love a brotherhood story. Fan family, as you guys know, found family is one of my favorite absolute all-time tropes, but especially between rough and gruff men, I don't know, it just melts my heart. And in The Theft of Swords, you follow Royce and Hadrian, who already have an established relationship in this book. They've been working together for years, which is what the sister series follows, is their origin story, how they became Rhaenyra. In this, they are already a group of men, well, they're 2 men who work together, and they get hired on a job that ends up having them steal something, and they get involved in kingdom politics that they really didn't want to be in really quickly with, oh, it's so good. I don't even know how to describe it past that, but it's fantastic seeing the shenanigans that they get up to and the love that they have for each other, even though they won't say it. It's amazing. I love it. My number 2 favorite series has to go to the Rook and Rose series, which is another like super chunky series. So I'll just show you the books individually. We have Mask of Mirrors. We have The Liar's Knot, which is my favorite of the series, although all of them are amazing. And then we have The Labyrinth's Heart. So I need to reread these. The Mask of Mirrors follows, well, all of them follow the same set of characters, but in this first book, you follow Renata in a Venetian society. Weird that I featured 2 Venetian-like stories or settings within my top 10, but you follow her in a society where there are multiple magic systems at play, very complex magic systems, I might add. She is a con artist, and she comes into this noble society and is trying to convince a noble family that is in dire straits that she is related to them and that she can help them essentially solve their problems. But her end goal is to steal all their money and run and live happily ever after with her sister in a very distant town. And she ends up getting pulled into the underbelly of society as well as noble politics that she didn't expect. And the found family elements in this are just freaking fantastic. I love it. Not only her and her sister, but there are also some other characters that I'm not going to name because it's a little bit spoilery. My 2 favorite characters from this series you would not expect to be your favorites in the beginning just because of how the series starts. Maybe not. Maybe other people would expect it, but I definitely didn't. And this series made me laugh, it made me cry, and I mean, there's plenty to go around. There's a glossary of all of the different magical terms and things that you learn throughout the story. There's a talking animal in this. I won't say anything more about that. It's just absolutely wonderful to meet a cast of characters that I was sad when the series ended and I didn't get to know anything more about them. This author, this is a duo, what am I trying to say? This is an author duo. It's not just one author, M.A. Carrick, it's actually 2 authors. The first one is Marie Brennan. Oh, crap. Oh, I made a rule that I couldn't repeat. I'm gonna allow this, guys. I'm breaking my own rules. I didn't even realize that M in M.A. Carrick stands for Marie Brennan. The second author I'm not as familiar with. Her first name is Anne, I think, or Anna. I was wrong. Her first name is Alec. It's Alec Helms, which is the author of The Adventures of Mr. Mystic. I'm just slightly bending my rules because I did tell you guys I wasn't going to repeat authors, and Marie Brennan technically is the author or one of the authors in this, but because it's an author duo, that's why I'm allowing it, and this is definitely my number 2 spot. I'm not giving it up for anything else. So yes. And I am really excited because this author duo is coming out with a new series, I think in 2025, that I'm really excited to get to. So I want to reread these. This might have to be a reread project for next year. And that leaves my number 1 spot, guys. And I bet you might have been able to guess it if you've watched my content for a while. I'm not going to hold up the whole series because I can't. But that is the Stormlight Archive by Brandon Sanderson. The Way of Kings is, I think this might be my favorite book of all time. Like, this particular book in the series is, that's another list I could do for you guys. Favorite books of all time. I don't even want to think about it. We're only looking at 21st century. I don't have to look at anything else. I've created my top 10 lists. And this is my top 10, my number 1 spot for my top fantasy book of the 21st century. I think this, or top fantasy series of the 21st century, I think this is absolutely insane. It is as good as everyone says it is. The hype is real. I don't care what you say. I know that it's not for everybody. It is chunky and every book gets bigger, but it's oh so worth it. If you haven't heard of Stormlight, I don't even know how to describe this to you. Each book follows a cast of characters. Every single book does, but each one has a character that they are focusing on. And this book, the main character is Kaladin. And so his story is very sad and really grief-stricken. He loses his brother at a young age. He is enslaved, for lack of a better word. And he is forced to fight in a war that he doesn't really want to. All of these things you get to see throughout this really accessible story. I know it's huge, and so people are intimidated by the Stormlight Archive, but I really believe that Sanderson's mark of fame or whatever, like, his gift is to be able to write really intimidating reads that can reach a multitude of readers, because you do not have to be a person who has read a ton of fantasy to understand what's going on in these books. And his characters are just amazing. They all are so unique and so individual. There is such great rep for mental health in these books, and the worlds are just vast. The amount of Easter eggs that I've read, I'm kind of getting into the Cosmere, which is the universe that this book exists in. If you read Stormlight and you have read other books by Sanderson, you will begin to see the sprinklings of the Cosmere throughout his other works. And I think that is what makes this my favorite series of all time, is that there are so many books that I could read that have little things that I'll be like, oh, that was in Stormlight. And it's always in my mind, because it doesn't matter what I pick up by Brandon Sanderson. I mean, it does. You have to pick up a Cosmere book, but most of the Cosmere books are going to have these little tiny Easter eggs in them that are just fantastic to find. And it's not that you have to know, because if you haven't ever read Cosmere before, you're not going to know what you're missing, because it's not completely pivotal to the story, but it is significant enough that whenever you do start reading them and you see the pieces fit together, oh, it's so fun. I love it. But anyway, enough of me gushing. I know you guys probably know this series, but this is my number 1 spot. So that is my top 10 fantasy series of the 21st century. What did you think of my list? Have you read any of these? Do you want to read any of them? Do you disagree with my list? Do you have your own? I would love to chat with you guys about this in the comments. This was a really fun list to curate. It was also really nerve-wracking. There were a lot of series that I couldn't include just because I only had 10 spots. And even that, I still gave you 16. But you'll put up with me. If you're not feeling chatty today, you can just leave a little sword in the comments for me to let me know that you're here. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you have a lovely evening, and I will see you in the next one. Bye.